All right, congratulations. I'm glad you guys watched that first video. And if you haven't, make sure you watch that one first. But this is the second part of the video series for home buyers, where I'm just going from A to Z through the entire process just to make sure that you are very up to speed and don't have any uncertainty or any questions before we have a chance to meet face-to-face or over a Zoom call. So today, we're going to talk about two things. First, we're going to talk about how it is so important and actually a legal requirement going into later this year. Before I ever take any clients out to see homes or really do anything, we need to have what's called a signed buyer representation agreement. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then number two, we're going to talk about what the pre-approval process is if you're going to be buying a home and requiring it to be financed. So if you're not able or don't want to pay cash for this home that you're going to be purchasing, what you're going to need is to have a pre-approval through a lender that's saying that you're approved up to a certain dollar amount for a mortgage on the house that we're going to go out and look at. So those are the two things we're going to talk about. We're going to go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, this buyer representation agreement. So you might just be asking yourself, what is a buyer representation agreement? Well, earlier this year, there was a big settlement with NAR, the National Association of Realtors. And in the past, this wasn't as definitive of a part of the process as it's going to be now required to be. So a buyer agency agreement is just a legal binding document that is just establishing a relationship between myself as an agent and the buyer, you as my client. This agreement is a legally bound contract between myself as the agent and you as my client, the buyer, to ensure that I always am bound to have your interests as my top priority. This also includes the fiduciary responsibility of always giving you the best advice and the best counsel to ensure that the decisions you're making are very clearly understood and you're making the best decision possible with the information that I'm providing you. One of the key elements of this agreement is clarifying that me as the agent is solely focused on you as the buyer and not doing anything for the sellers. And what that means is when it gets time where we're under contract and starting to negotiate, I have your interests as the only thing that's important, and I'm not doing anything to jeopardize that by also communicating with the sellers outside of just the normal stuff that we need to talk about to get the job done. In addition to me as the agent working exclusively for you, the buyer, it's also in the contract establishing that you're only working with me and you're not talking to other real estate agents and what we call sign crossing, meaning that you're talking to several different agents at the same time. That's against the law, and anytime there's an agreement with any real estate agent, it's always exclusive to either that agent or if they're part of a larger agency, maybe a company with several agents within it, there's also the opportunity to have an agreement with all of them. But to not get too complicated here, the main thing with this agreement that we're going to have to sign before we go out and look at homes is just establishing that agreement where I'm representing you as the buyer and only you, and you as the buyer are agreeing to just work with myself and not other agents. However, I also want to just point out that I am very, very, very confident that, the services that I provide, I always stand 110% behind. And if at any point you ever feel like I'm not living up to your expectations, we can always cancel this contract without any sort of issue. So by only working with myself and no other real estate agents, that's just also providing me the confidence that I can give you 110% of my time and energy to ensure that we have a good, solid working relationship going both ways. Before we move on to part 2 of this video, the last part is again going back to that NAR settlement and just understanding that the biggest change, if you do start to hear about this in the news, is how the buyer commissions are structured. In the past, they were always assumed to be paid by the seller, where now that's negotiable. Now think about it from this perspective. As a seller, you want to have the most eyeballs and the most traffic and interest on your property. So most experts are still predicting that sellers will be, for the most part, paying these commissions in order to entice buyers and their agents to come see their property and give it as much attention as possible. We'll go through all of this in more depth when we actually review this contract together, but I just want to give you a couple high-level points about just what this agreement is. All right, so then the second part of this video today, I want to talk about pre-approval and how important this is before we ever start to go out and look at homes. We're going to talk today about a few different things, but first off, just why it's so important to have a pre-approval letter, and then also just what the steps are to get pre-approved. Now, you always have the ability to search for any lenders that you feel would be great to work with. I do, however, have a few that I prefer that I would love to recommend that you reach out to and connect with. In fact, if you do want me to connect you, I like to provide at least 2, but ideally 3, for you to then do your own research on and pick which one you feel you might work the best with. These lenders are very familiar with this part of the process, so don't feel overwhelmed. They're going to do a great job educating you on specifically what documents you need to provide them and just what to expect during this pre-approval process. When you're searching for a lender, if you don't want to use one of my preferred lenders, the key is also just understanding there's different types of lenders. There's banks, credit unions, and mortgage brokers. All of these different types of lenders will have different structured fees, different types of loans available, lots of different things to consider. So biggest and most important thing right now is just to understand that the first step is connecting with a couple of these lenders and just to get the ball rolling. That initial consultation that you'll have with the lender should take anywhere between maybe 45 minutes up to possibly an hour. A lot of these can also be done remotely through a Zoom call, similar to what we're gonna have if we haven't already. And a lot of it will come down to being prepared with what documents you need to compile and provide them for them to actually process this pre-approval application. They'll go through this in much more depth with you, but a few examples of some of this documentation that you might need to provide them will be things like income verification, so recent pay stubs. Typically, it's for the last 2 to 3 months. Any W-2 tax forms, typically they're going to require the last 2 years, and any recent tax returns. If you're self-employed, you're definitely going to have 2 years of tax returns in order to qualify for most traditional types of loans. They're also going to want to do some credit history checks, so you'll need to provide consent for a credit check. This can have an impact on your loan terms depending on how good your credit is. On a side note, I actually have a building your credit guide and playbook that I've created to help people that are potentially wanting to improve their credit scores a little bit. So if you're watching this video today and maybe you're not actually going to be looking for a home for another 6 months, this is a great resource for you where you'll be able to get some actionable ideas and steps you can take today so that credit score is at its best possible number for when the time comes to get this pre-approval. If you guys want a copy of that, it's completely free. I'll put a link down below and you guys can download a free copy. So in addition to that income verification and that credit history, they're also going to want to make sure they review any of your assets or your debts. This will involve looking at your bank statements from the past few months and just asking you what you potentially have as an asset or a debt. So if you have several credit cards, for example, those are debts. Or if potentially if you have a car that you financed, that would be a debt. So there's all sorts of different debts as well as assets. Maybe you own some different stuff as well. The loan officer, when you do this pre-approval initial meeting, is going to provide you with a list of everything you need to put together for them, just so they have a full, complete idea of where you're going to be qualified for your loan. Now, if you have a less than perfect credit score right now, don't let that beat you down to the point of thinking that you can't buy a home right now. There are plenty of options out there, even for people with subpar credit scores. And if you want a specific kind of an idea of what those numbers are, again, I've got that credit guidebook. Definitely download a copy of that because we go into much more in-depth, and I'll provide you with all of the details on that in that guidebook. If possible, the biggest thing is you always want to have under 30% of your total amount of credit being used at that time. So as an example, let's just say you have 2 different credit cards and they're each $5,000 credit limits. So you have a $10,000 credit limit total for everything that you have out there with credit companies. You always want to have at the maximum 30% of that as money that you've been borrowing on. So if you have $10,000 credit limit, you never want to have more than $3,000 on that credit card on a consistent basis at the end of each month. So if you're always able to pay that down below that 30% mark, that's really going to be one of the best ways to improve your credit score significantly. So That's just an example of one tip to make sure that your credit is as good as possible when this pre-approval time comes. Now, during this meeting with the loan officer and getting this pre-approval set up, they're also going to talk all the different types of loans and mortgages. For example, there's fixed rate, there's adjustable rate mortgages, there's 15-year, there's 30-year. There's a lot of different stuff that they're going to go in depth and explain to you just to really figure out what serves your exact specific needs the best. Once you've gathered all this information that they've asked and you've sent it over to them and they've compiled it and they've submitted it and gotten this pre-approval amount, there's a few things you want to understand here as well. In this pre-approval letter, you're going to have three things. You're going to have the loan amount that you're pre-approved for. It's going to talk through what the current interest rate and type of loan is that you're approved for. And number three, it's going to have an expiration for how long this pre-approval letter is valid for. It's really important to remember that pre-approvals have a limited amount of time that they're valid for until you're going to have to get a new pre-approval or just update the one that you currently have. Having this pre-approval letter is incredibly important, not just so you have the confidence in the true understanding of what you want to be spending when you're looking for homes, what that dollar amount is, but also it's a great way to really show sellers that you're a serious buyer. So if you find that home that you really love and you want to put an offer on, having that pre-approval letter is really these days a must in order to show the seller that you're serious and they feel confident with potentially accepting your offer. So once you've got that pre-approval letter in hand, congratulations, you've taken another step towards making this dream a reality. And now it's important for us to start talking again about some of these things to keep in mind once you've been pre-approved. I'm going to share a couple of these with you guys right now, but again, in that credit playbook that I have a link for down below, as well as my buyer's guide, also completely free. You can download it down below. In both of those, I've got some great tips that are really important to keep in mind so you don't accidentally take your pre-approval letter and compromise it by doing certain things, excessive spending or co-signing on somebody else's loans or debts. There's some very important things to ensure that we have everything where we need it to be when that time comes to submit an offer when you find that perfect house. So we'll start talking about a few other things, one of these being budgeting. So you might be pre-approved. Let's say you're pre-approved for a $400,000 home. Even though it's a $400,000 home, it's also important to realize that there are going to be some other costs associated with buying this house. So rather than finding a home at $400,000, accounting for some of these other expenses, you might realize that we really want to find a home that's at $375 to account for some of these other expenses that are without a doubt going to come up at the closing table when we finally get to the point of buying the home. This could include things like property taxes, insurance, closing costs, and depending on what type of a home you're buying, if it's a new construction home, for example, oftentimes there's certain things that are not included at closing. So with a new construction home, there's typically four that are a lot of times not even included. And those are going to be the window coverings, so any sort of window shades, sometimes a refrigerator, a washer dryer, and then also a lot of times the rear landscaping of the home in new construction communities is not included in the sale price. So this is just an example to show you how some of these expenses are going to come up. So it's always important to have that pre-approval amount and then understand what additional expenses to be budgeting for ahead of time. So this is the best part, guys. Now we get to start actually doing more legitimate home searching, identifying what neighborhoods and what parts of town are the most interesting to you, and then we can start going out and looking at homes together. So I'm really excited to have you guys get through this part of the home buying process. I know it's not the most fun to just have to put together all this paperwork and have somebody that you don't know looking through your financial stuff, but these lenders do it every single day, so don't be too uptight and worried about it. It's just one more way to be educated and really understand, what the dollar amount is that we should be focusing on, and to make sure that we're making a sound financial decision when buying this house for you. Once we start looking at houses, we'll definitely keep in touch with the lender and just give them occasional updates, making sure also that we're not doing anything different from the norm that might jeopardize the credit score or just the amount that you're qualified for in this pre-approval letter. And then also, depending on how long it takes us to find the home, we might need to get this pre-approval letter updated if it does get towards that 6-month mark where it could potentially be expiring. So I hope you guys got some value out of this. I know we talked about quite a few different things in here, and I alluded to several different times about these additional guides and resources I have available. So just one last time, I wanna make sure you guys get that because I go in a lot more depth and detail in those resources so you really can be clear in understanding all of this, again, from A to Z. So make sure you guys download those down below. We have the 2024 Buyer's Guide. I have the new construction guide if that's something that's interesting to you. And then we have this credit boosting playbook where not only does it give very good actionable tips for how to improve your credit so you are in the best position possible when this time comes, but I also have a 10-week weekly email that also goes out that gives you each week a little bit of homework, just a little actionable tip for you to do in order to ensure that you're getting your score to the highest possible number it can get to. So hope you guys are excited as much as I am. I really look forward to start showing you guys homes. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out. And don't forget, once you're through this next phase, this is when the fun starts. This is when we get to start really deciding, what parts of town are the most enticing and exciting for you to consider living in and start going out and looking at homes together. So I can't wait to start doing that with you. Next video, got a lot more content coming out all about the actual steps that are going to happen once we go out and look at homes and find one that we want to submit an offer on. So this next video, if you're ready, go ahead and watch it now. If not, feel free to come back to it later, where we're going to talk about just the process from submitting an offer, getting that home inspected, appraised, some of these different dates and deadlines that are the big part of my job as your agent, as your realtor, to ensure that we're negotiating on these different items and ensuring that we're always looking out for your best interests and getting you the best possible home for the best possible price and just making sure that everybody is a winner. So look forward to sharing all that with you guys. And like I said, reach out if you have any questions at all. I'll see you on the next video.